Far beyond the stars that humans could see in a quiet corner of the galaxy, there was a planet called Ilaria. It was a small, fragile world, but it had once been full of life and wonder. Tall trees stretched into the sky. Rivers shone like silver. Ribbons and strange flowers glowed faintly in the moonlight. The creatures who lived there, called the Ilarans, were gentle and intelligent. They loved their world, cared for every living thing, and had a talent for healing. Their cities were not like human cities. They were built from living plants and stones growing naturally, blending perfectly with nature. The Ilarans believed that everything had a right to exist, and they spent their lives protecting the forests, rivers, and animals. But peace does not last forever, especially in a galaxy full of greed and ambition. Slowly, other civilizations began to notice Ilaria. They saw the planet's beauty as a resource to be taken, not a gift to be respected. Giant mining fleets arrived, tearing up forests and pumping the planet's rivers dry. The Ilarans tried to resist peacefully at first. They sent messages to the Galactic Council asking for protection and fairness. They pleaded with the larger species to respect their home. But the Council, full of powerful and self-interested beings, ignored them. Meetings were postponed, promises were broken, and finally, the Ilarans were told bluntly that they had no importance in galactic politics. For the Ilarans, it was devastating. They had always believed that the galaxy was full of beings who could understand compassion, who could see the value of life beyond profit. Now, their hopes were gone. Their forests were cut down, their rivers poisoned, and their cities slowly crumbled. Children grew up learning to hide, to scavenge, and to survive quietly. There were no heroes coming to save them, no armies to fight for justice, only the silence of a universe that had turned its back on them. Even as despair settled over the planet, the Ilarans refused to give up completely. They still had one thing left, their voice. They built a small signal transmitter, simple by galactic standards, but powerful enough to send a message into the stars. It was a desperate call for help, a plea that someone, anyone, would hear them. The signal contained coordinates to their hidden shelters, descriptions of their needs, and one simple truth. They wanted to live. It was not a threat. It was not a demand. It was a quiet, trembling hope that someone would care enough to respond. For years, the signal went unanswered. The Ilarans watched ships come and go, sometimes ignoring them completely, sometimes taking what they wanted and leaving. Every unanswered call felt like another step toward the edge of extinction. But still the Ilarans kept sending the signal. Each day they whispered their story into the vast emptiness, hoping that it would reach a being with courage and compassion, someone who would not walk away. Meanwhile, far across the galaxy, on a small blue planet called Earth, the signal arrived. It was faint at first, buried among countless cosmic noises that humans had been listening to for decades. A group of independent scientists and space enthusiasts, who spent their nights staring at the stars and listening to the universe, noticed something unusual. The pattern of the signal was not random. It had structure, intelligence behind it. They worked quietly at first, analyzing the pulses and frequencies. Some thought it was a mistake or interference or even a hoax. But as they dug deeper, they realized this was real. The message was clear in its desperation. It spoke of a dying planet, of a people who had been abandoned, of children who had never known freedom because their world was being destroyed around them. The scientists tried to share their findings with governments and larger space organizations, but most dismissed it as nonsense or too insignificant to act on. Yet a few people refused to ignore it. They felt a strange connection to the message, as if the voices of the Ilarans had reached across the vast distance of space to touch them personally. It was more than curiosity. It was a call to do something. The humans who chose to listen began to plan. They did not have the approval of the United Nations or the Galactic Council. They had no powerful fleets or advanced weapons. What they had was determination, ingenuity, and the belief that saving lives mattered more than rules or politics. They began building equipment, studying alien technology from old archives, and preparing for a journey that would take them far, beyond anything humans had attempted before. Every day, the signal reminded them that time was running out. The Ellerans were fading, and the galaxy's indifference was closing in like a shadow. On Ilaria, the Alarans could not know if anyone would ever respond. Every night they would gather in their remaining cities, small groups huddled together, telling stories of the past when their world was green and alive. They whispered dreams of survival to each other, hoping that some miracle might come. The elders taught the young to cherish life even when all hope seemed lost. They reminded them that their planet and their people were worth fighting for, even if the rest of the galaxy had turned away. The humans, meanwhile, worked tirelessly. They designed ships capable of long-distance travel, navigation systems that could reach Ilaria without relying on the galactic authorities, and communication tools that could respond to the faint signal. Every step forward was a risk, but giving up was never an option. Some nights they would sit and listen to the signal again, hearing the desperation in every pulse, the quiet hope that someone would care. And slowly, a connection grew, a bridge of empathy across light years, built on the simple understanding that life, wherever it existed, was precious. Finally, after months of preparation, the humans were ready to act. They knew the journey would be dangerous, that they might be stopped by larger powers or face unknown threats in the vast emptiness of space. But they also knew that waiting for permission or recognition could mean the end for the Ellerans. With hearts full of courage and a deep sense of purpose, they prepared to leave Earth behind, to cross the stars, and to stand for a people who had been abandoned. On Ilaria, the Alarans continued to hope. They did not know when or if help would arrive. They only knew that each day brought new challenges, new struggles to survive, and new reminders that they were alone in the eyes of the galaxy. Yet in their hearts, the whisper of possibility remained. Perhaps, somewhere far away, there were beings who would answer their call, who would see their suffering and act not out of obligation, but out of compassion. Perhaps they were not completely forgotten. And in that quiet, fragile hope, the story of a small, forgotten world began to change. The first threads of a connection between two very different species were forming, pulled together by empathy and the simple belief that saving life was worth the risk. It was the beginning of something bigger than politics, bigger than fear, bigger than despair. It was the start of a journey that would test courage, compassion, and the willingness of humans to rise in defense of those who had been abandoned by a galaxy too busy to care. Far across the galaxy, the faint signal from Ilaria continued to drift through the endless darkness. On Earth, it had finally begun to stir curiosity among a small group of people who had spent their lives staring at the stars and listening to the universe. These were not powerful politicians, not military leaders, and not wealthy businessmen. They were scientists, engineers, and dreamers who believed that life mattered, no matter where it existed. For years, they had tracked strange signals, studied patterns of energy, and explored the unknown. But this signal was different. It was not a mystery to be solved, not an anomaly to study for fame or recognition. It was a cry for help, a message filled with quiet desperation that demanded action. The first step was to confirm that it was real. The team spent weeks analyzing the data, cross-checking frequencies, and filtering out interference. Every calculation brought the same conclusion. The signal was intelligent, deliberate, and coming from far beyond the solar system. They could not tell who or what was sending it, only that it had a purpose. Then, piece by piece, the content of the message became clearer. The Alarans were survivors, hiding on a planet that had been ravaged by exploitation. Their world was dying, their cities were crumbling, and they had almost no way to defend themselves. Every word of the message was filled with fear, but also with hope. Somehow they still believed someone might answer. When the team shared their findings with governments and international space agencies, the response was disappointing but not surprising. Many dismissed it as a technical glitch, a prank, or an unimportant anomaly. Some governments refused to acknowledge it at all, citing budget constraints, political complications, or the simple idea that it was someone else's problem. The powerful in the galaxy were too busy with wars, trade disputes, and alliances to care about a small, fading world. But for the team on Earth, the message was impossible to ignore. Each pulse of the signal seemed to speak directly to them, asking them to act where others would not. Among the scientists, engineers, and space enthusiasts, a plan began to take shape. It was risky, perhaps even impossible by conventional standards, but it was the only way to respond to the Elleran's plea. They would organize a mission, build a ship capable of long-distance travel, and reach Ilaria without relying on the approval or support of the Galactic Council. No one had ever attempted such a thing before. The odds were against them, but the purpose was clear. They were not doing this for recognition, fame, or power. They were doing it because it was the right thing to do. Humanity had observed injustice in the galaxy for centuries, but this time, they were choosing to intervene. The preparations were painstaking. Every part of the ship had to be tested, every system simulated, and every route calculated. They studied ancient records of space travel, examined alien technology archives, and designed equipment that could survive the unknown dangers of deep space. Communication devices were specially modified to maintain contact across unimaginable distances. Supplies for survival and aid were packed carefully. Food, medicine, and tools were included, but also seeds, technology manuals, and devices that could help the Ilarans rebuild their world. Every detail mattered because they knew that failure was not an option. While Earth prepared, the Ilarans continued to struggle for survival. Their cities were now half-buried ruins, their forests reduced to stumps, and their rivers poisoned by foreign fleets. The younger generation of Ilarans had never known the beauty their planet once held. They lived in tunnels and shelters, scavenging for food and water, learning from the elders how to endure hardship and keep hope alive. Every day was a fight against despair, but even in their darkest moments, they sent their signal again and again, hoping for a response. They did not expect miracles, yet they whispered prayers to the stars, believing that life, somewhere, might care for them. Back on Earth, as preparations continued, the team faced their own struggles. Funding was limited. Some of their colleagues and friends doubted the mission, warning that it was foolish, dangerous, or even impossible. Equipment failed during tests, calculations had to be redone, and setbacks were frequent. At times, the team questioned whether they could succeed. But every time doubt crept in, they returned to the signal, to the tiny planet in the distance that had no other hope. Each pulse reminded them that a species' survival depended on their courage and commitment. Slowly, determination replaced doubt, and the mission began to take real shape. One night, as they gathered in a small lab filled with computers, charts, and models, the lead engineer looked at the team and said, "We might not be able to save everyone, but if we do nothing, we know for certain that they will die. That is not an option." The words hung in the air like a challenge. They all understood that their mission was bigger than themselves. It was not about glory or recognition. It was about empathy, responsibility, and the belief that life, any life, was worth defending. That belief became the foundation of their plan. The technology they developed was remarkable but not perfect. The ship would be small, lacking the size and firepower of galactic fleets, and it relied heavily on ingenuity rather than brute strength. Every system had backups, and every crew member had to be trained for multiple roles. Navigation through uncharted regions of space required courage and creativity. Yet the team believed that intelligence, careful planning, and unwavering commitment could make up for what they lacked in resources. They were not the most powerful beings in the galaxy, but they might become the most determined. As the launch day approached, the team held a final meeting. They discussed the risks, the uncertainties, and the possibility that they might never return. Some spoke of fear, while others spoke of hope. But all of them shared a common understanding. They were about to do what no one else dared. They would cross the stars to help a species that had been abandoned, to answer a call that the galaxy had ignored. In that moment, they were connected not only to one another, but to the tiny world of Ilaria, to the Ilarans whose lives depended on courage that humans had only just found. Finally, the ship was ready. The engines hummed with energy, and the communication systems were calibrated to pick up even the faintest signals from Ilaria. The team boarded with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. Outside, the world continued its ordinary rhythm, unaware that a small group of humans was about to make history in a part of the galaxy most had never imagined. The countdown began, and as the engines ignited, the ship lifted off, leaving Earth behind. On Ilaria, the signal continued, unaware that it had been heard. The Ilarans slept in their shelters, weary from another day of survival. Yet somewhere in the void, a change was happening. Across the light years, a small blue planet had responded. The first step toward rescue, toward hope, had begun. And though neither humans nor Ilarans could see the other yet, the bridge between two worlds was forming, built on determination, courage, and the simple, powerful belief that life, no matter where it exists, deserves a chance. The journey ahead would be long, difficult, and full of unknown dangers. But for the first time in years, there was hope. The Ilarans, hidden and fragile, and the humans, daring and determined, were now linked by the possibility of survival, by the quiet understanding that compassion can cross even the greatest distances. It was a beginning, a spark of light in the vast darkness of space, and it was enough to change everything. The ship had left Earth behind, slowly moving through the empty stretches of space. The engines hummed steadily, a quiet reminder that the humans on board had taken the first step toward something that most of the galaxy would never dare. For the crew, every moment was filled with both excitement and fear. They were venturing into unknown space, beyond any official routes, beyond the protection of any authority. The path to Ilaria was uncharted, full of potential dangers, but every person on board knew that turning back was not an option. The first few days were calm, almost peaceful. Stars drifted past the windows, and the crew watched constellations they had only read about in books. They spent hours checking instruments, running simulations, and double-checking navigation coordinates. Every detail mattered. A small miscalculation could send them off course for light years, or worse, into regions controlled by powerful fleets who would not welcome an unauthorized human ship. And yet, amidst the tension, there was a growing sense of purpose. They were not just explorers. They were defenders, answering a call that no one else had bothered to hear. It did not take long for the dangers of deep space to make themselves known. Asteroid fields loomed ahead, invisible in most scanners until it was almost too late. Meteor showers slammed past the ship, rattling hulls and sending small alarms blaring. The crew worked tirelessly, rerouting power, adjusting shields, and navigating through debris that could tear the ship apart in seconds. Each challenge tested not only their technical skills, but their courage and teamwork. Arguments sometimes flared when stress ran high, but they reminded each other of their mission. The Ilarans' lives were far more important than minor frustrations or fears. As the ship moved deeper into unclaimed regions of space, the crew began to notice the signs of the galaxy's indifference. They encountered worlds abandoned by powerful civilizations, planets stripped of resources, and cities left to decay. The scars of exploitation were everywhere, a harsh reminder of what had happened to Ilaria. The humans had prepared for technical difficulties and natural hazards, but witnessing the consequences of galactic greed left a heavy weight on their hearts. Each ruined world was a warning of what might happen if they failed, but also a reason to press forward. They had seen the problem, and now they were determined to be part of the solution. Communication with Earth became increasingly difficult. The further they traveled, the more the signals weakened. Every time a message from home arrived, it was delayed by hours, then days, then weeks. The crew had to rely on their own judgment, often making decisions without guidance from anyone else. They learned quickly that independence was no longer optional. Each choice could mean the difference between life and death, not just for themselves, but for the Ilarans waiting at the end of the journey. Despite the isolation, a quiet camaraderie grew among the crew. They shared stories of life on Earth, memories of family and friends, and hopes for the future. These small moments reminded them why they were willing to risk everything. Not every obstacle was natural, The humans soon realized that the Galactic Council had noticed their unauthorized travel. Patrol ships designed to enforce rules and protect powerful interests appeared unexpectedly along their route. At first, the humans tried to avoid them, using stealth maneuvers and careful navigation to slip past sensors. But they soon understood that discretion alone would not be enough. They would have to confront the reality that their mission was not sanctioned, and that their efforts might be considered illegal or even hostile. The crew did not waver. They knew the Council would never help Ilaria, so they refused to let fear of authority stop them from doing what was right. During these tense encounters, the crew learned to innovate. They modified ship systems in real time, adjusting frequencies to avoid detection, rerouting energy to shields, and using clever tactics to bypass patrols. Every success built confidence, and every failure taught valuable lessons. They became experts in improvisation, learning that survival often depended more on creativity than technology. Even in the face of potential confrontation with far more powerful ships, the humans relied on intelligence, teamwork, and determination to keep moving forward. Amid the dangers, moments of awe reminded them why space exploration had always captivated humanity. They passed through nebulae that glowed in shades of purple and gold, watched planets with rings wider than entire continents, and encountered phenomena that defied explanation. Even in the midst of fear and uncertainty, the universe revealed its beauty. For the crew, these moments were more than scenery. They were reminders of the value of life, the vastness of existence, and the importance of their mission. They were carrying hope across these unimaginable distances, and the sight of wonder among the stars gave them strength. As the journey continued, the crew also had to deal with the psychological toll of isolation. Weeks passed without seeing another human being, without knowing if anyone would respond to their reports. Small conflicts flared, stress led to sleepless nights, and moments of doubt threatened to undermine their resolve. Yet in those times, the memory of the Ilaran signal, filled with quiet desperation and hope, served as a guiding light. They reminded each other that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to move forward despite it. Every challenge became not just a technical problem, but a test of character and commitment. The humans also began to understand more about the Ilaran's plight through the signal itself. Hidden data and patterns revealed details about the planet, its climate, its ecosystems, and the ways the Ilarans had tried to survive. They saw evidence of depleted forests, poisoned rivers, and underground shelters filled with families hiding from danger. The more they learned, the clearer it became that Ilaria was not just a distant planet. It was a world in desperate need, full of sentient beings who had been abandoned. The humans felt a personal responsibility. They were no longer just travelers. They were guardians carrying the hope of an entire species. Along the journey, unexpected dangers emerged as well. Space anomalies, gravity wells, radiation bursts, and unexplained energy surges tested the crew's skills to the limit. They spent days recalculating trajectories, running emergency drills, and repairing systems damaged by sudden storms of cosmic debris. Every successful maneuver strengthened their confidence and unity. Every near miss was a lesson, a reminder that their mission demanded vigilance, patience, and unwavering determination. Finally, after what felt like months of travel, through hostile, uncharted space, the ship approached the coordinates sent by the Ilarans. The crew could hardly believe it. They had crossed regions of the galaxy where few humans had ever dared to venture, avoiding patrols, navigating hazards, and surviving against the odds. As they drew closer, the signal became clearer, stronger, more desperate, as if the Ilarans themselves were sensing that help was finally near. The humans felt a mixture of relief, anticipation, and renewed urgency. They knew that reaching Ilaria was only the beginning. The real challenge, meeting the Ilarans, delivering aid, and confronting the forces that had abandoned them, was about to start. Even in these final hours of the journey, the crew remained vigilant. Every sensor scan, every adjustment of speed, and every calculation mattered. They approached cautiously, aware that the world they were entering was fragile and that their actions could have profound consequences. Yet there was also a deep sense of purpose, a knowledge that every risk was worth it if it meant saving lives. Across light years of space, a bridge was forming between two very different species, united by hope, courage, and the simple belief that life deserves to be protected. As the ship neared Ilaria, the crew felt a mix of awe and anxiety. Through the view screens, they could see the outlines of a world scarred by time, exploitation, and neglect. Rivers were narrower than expected, forests were sparse, and cities seemed to cling to life in small pockets. Yet they also saw signs of resilience, small glowing lights in hidden valleys, subtle energy signatures indicating life, and faint signals from the shelters where the ailerons had survived. For the humans, this was a moment of triumph and responsibility. They had made it through dangers no one else would face, and now the real task began. The journey beyond the Council's reach had been long and difficult. The crew had faced dangers, natural and political, technical and psychological, and had emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined. They were now prepared not only to deliver aid, but to confront the injustices that had brought Ilaria to the brink of collapse. Every lesson learned in the dark expanse of space would be applied in the days ahead. For the first time in years, the Ilarans were not alone. Humanity had come, not as observers, not as bureaucrats, but as defenders willing to risk everything for the lives of another species. As the ship prepared to enter orbit, the crew gathered together, taking a moment to reflect. They were far from home, surrounded by the vast emptiness of space, and yet more connected than ever to a world that had been abandoned. The signal had led them here, and now it was time to act. Across millions of miles, two species were about to meet, one in desperation, the other in hope, and the course of history for both would be forever changed. As the ship descended toward Ilaria, a quiet tension filled the cabin. Outside the windows, the planet stretched out like a fragile jewel, scarred yet still beautiful. Mountains, rivers, and remnants of forests passed beneath them, revealing a world that had once thrived and now struggled to survive. The crew held their breath. Months of preparation, weeks of travel, and countless risks had led them to this moment. Every pulse of the signal they had been tracking, every calculation, every adjustment. They had done it all for this first contact. The first signs of life were subtle. Tiny lights flickered in hidden valleys, and faint energy readings suggested habitation. The Ilarans had been careful. They had learned to hide, to protect themselves from intruders who might harm them. They had lived in underground shelters, tunnels, and hidden sanctuaries, avoiding anyone who might see them as weak or exploitable. For years, they had feared the galaxy's indifference, but now, something different approached. The humans' ship moved steadily, purposefully, yet not aggressively. The Ilarans sensed the difference immediately, their instincts alert yet hopeful. When the ship finally landed in a cleared area outside one of the Ilaran settlements, the humans took a deep breath. They knew that every movement, every word would matter. They stepped out carefully, not as conquerors, not as soldiers, but as allies. The air on Ilaria was thin, and the landscape smelled of dust and faint traces of life. But the humans were prepared. They moved slowly, showing respect, speaking softly. They did not want to frighten the Ilarans, who had spent years fearing outsiders. From the tunnels and hidden shelters, the Ilarans watched cautiously. Small figures emerged, curious, yet wary. Their eyes, large and luminous, reflected both fear and wonder. They had heard the signal continue to arrive for years, but they had never dared to hope that anyone would come. And now, standing before them, were beings from a distant world, willing to risk themselves for the Ilaran survival. It was difficult for them to comprehend. Why would anyone care? Why would a species that had never interacted with them cross light years to help? The first words spoken were tentative, careful. The humans introduced themselves slowly, explaining that they had come because the Ilarans were not alone, that their suffering had been heard. The language barrier was challenging, but the humans had studied the Ilaran signals extensively. They, had practiced decoding their patterns, mimicking sounds and gestures that the Alarans would recognize. Communication was slow at first, filled with pauses, clarifications, and repeated attempts. But the intent was clear. The humans were here to help, not to take, not to command. Trust could not be demanded. It had to be earned. Over the first hours, the humans demonstrated their intentions through actions. They offered supplies, food, clean water, medical kits, and gestures of peace. They carefully examined the surroundings without touching anything unnecessarily. They asked questions, listened to answers, and acknowledged the Alarans' history and pain. Slowly, small gestures of acceptance began to appear. An elder stepped forward, tentatively, and allowed the humans to see inside one of the shelters. Children peeked curiously, holding back at first, then gradually approaching to observe these strange beings who had arrived to save them. The humans were careful not to overwhelm. They knew that the Alarans had survived through caution and secrecy, and sudden exposure to outsiders could be frightening. They spent time walking with the Alarans through their hidden tunnels, asking about the conditions, the struggles, and the needs of the people. They listened to stories of loss, of forests that had disappeared, of rivers that no longer flowed, and of families separated by scarcity and fear. Every story was a reminder of why they had traveled so far, and every response they gave was filled with empathy and determination. At night, the humans set up a small base near the settlement, using portable shelters and technology that could help the Alarans without disturbing their routines. They began distributing aid carefully. Food was rationed according to need, medicine was administered to those who had gone without care for too long, and water purification systems were installed to restore what had been poisoned. For the first time in years, the Alarans could sleep, without fear of hunger or sickness. The humans did not treat them as helpless, they treated them as partners in survival. Together, they worked to repair small sections of the tunnels and shelters, combining Alaran knowledge with human ingenuity. Even as they worked, the humans noticed the resilience of the Alarans. Despite everything they had endured, they had not lost their curiosity, intelligence, or sense of community. They shared knowledge of their planet's natural balance, explaining how certain plants could purify water, which animals could help restore ecosystems, and how their architecture had once harmonized with the land. The humans learned quickly, realizing that this mission was not just about saving lives, it was about preserving culture, knowledge, and a way of life that had survived against impossible odds. Small victories began to accumulate. The first children smiled while drinking clean water. The first plants planted in damaged soil began to take root. The first lessons exchanged between humans and Alarans about technology, medicine, and survival began to form bonds of trust and mutual respect. The Alarans, who had feared abandonment and betrayal for so long, now felt a fragile sense of safety. For the humans, these moments were proof that their efforts were meaningful, that crossing the galaxy had been worth every risk and every sacrifice. But even in these moments of hope, the humans knew that danger had not disappeared. They were still technically trespassing in the eyes of the Galactic Council. Their actions, though morally right, could be seen as illegal. They had no backup fleets, no political protection, and no way to guarantee that other forces would not intervene. Yet they refused to be intimidated. The Alarans' lives and their world's survival mattered more than bureaucracy or fear of authority. Courage, they realized, was not the absence of danger. It was acting in spite of it. Over days and weeks, communication grew stronger. The humans developed a simple system to talk with the Alarans quickly, combining gestures, sounds, and basic symbols that were understandable by both species. This allowed the Alarans to request supplies, share concerns, and express gratitude more directly. The humans, in turn, could explain procedures, teach survival techniques, and plan ways to restore the planet's damaged areas. Together, they formed a small but effective partnership, built on trust, empathy, and the shared goal of survival. The most emotional moment came when the humans witnessed the children of Alaria exploring their surroundings without fear for the first time in years. They played in the soil, ran along the riverbeds, and laughed in ways the humans had only read about in the signal transmissions. The adults watched cautiously at first, unsure if such joy could last. But as days passed, it became clear that hope was returning. The humans had not only delivered supplies, they had restored belief. Life on Ilaria, once fragile and desperate, now had a chance. Every interaction strengthened the bond. The humans learned about the Ilarans' culture, their rituals, and the ways they honored life and nature. They discovered that Ilarans celebrated resilience and community, valuing knowledge and compassion above power or conquest. The humans shared their own experiences of Earth, its challenges, its triumphs, and its diversity of life. Through this exchange, both species began to understand that survival was not just physical, it was also about connection, empathy, and the ability to care for one another even across worlds. By the end of the first week, the initial tension had eased. The Ilarans, once fearful and guarded, began to smile, speak freely, and even ask questions about the humans' journey. They marveled at the courage it had taken to cross the galaxy to help them. The humans, in turn, were humbled by the Ilarans' resilience, intelligence, and unwavering hope despite decades of neglect. Together they had crossed the most difficult threshold, the barrier of fear and mistrust, and now faced the future side by side. In these first days, the humans realized that their mission was more than a rescue. It was a lesson in compassion, courage, and the power of action. By choosing to answer the signal, they had reminded the Ilarans and themselves that life has value and that even a small group of determined beings can make a difference in the face of overwhelming odds. Across the ruined valleys, hidden tunnels, and fragile settlements, hope had begun to bloom once more. And as night fell over Ilaria, the stars above shone brighter, reflecting not just the distance of the galaxy, but the connection that had been forged between two worlds united by empathy, courage, and the simple desire to save lives. After weeks of working alongside the Ilarans, the humans began to feel a sense of accomplishment. They had delivered supplies, shared knowledge, and helped restore some of the planet's fragile systems. The Ilarans were learning to trust again, their hope slowly returning. Children played in open spaces without fear, adults shared stories freely, and the planet, though still scarred, seemed to breathe more easily. But despite these successes, a shadow loomed over their fragile peace. The Galactic Council had noticed their unauthorized presence, and now trouble was inevitable. The first warning arrived as a fleet of patrol ships appeared near the edges of the atmosphere. These ships were not sent as allies. They were enforcement, vessels heavily armed and designed to intimidate. The Council's message was clear: leave the planet immediately, or face consequences. They claimed that Earth had no right to interfere with another species, that the humans were breaking galactic law, and that Ilaria was under observation and would remain under the Council's control. The humans understood that these were threats, not guidance. They had no intention of leaving while the Ilarans were in danger. The humans convened quickly. They reviewed the Council's capabilities and realized that their small fleet, makeshift as it was, would be no match in a direct confrontation. Yet they also understood a truth that the Council did not. This was not about power or politics. This was about life. The humans began to strategize, relying not on weaponry alone but on ingenuity, preparation, and the element of surprise. They worked alongside the Ilarans to build defensive systems, improve shelter safety, and adapt existing technology for protection. Every decision was calculated, balancing risk with the need to protect lives. The Ilarans themselves were frightened. Many had never seen such large ships or such force directed at them. They had spent generations hiding, believing the galaxy would always turn away. Now they watched as humans stood beside them, calmly preparing defenses and refusing to retreat. It was unlike anything they had ever imagined. Slowly they began to help, sharing knowledge of their world's terrain, resources, and energy sources that could be adapted for defense. Together, humans and Ilarans began to create something that neither had ever built alone, a system capable of resisting overwhelming odds. As the Council's ships drew closer, tensions ran high. The humans positioned themselves strategically, Using natural landscapes to conceal their presence and reinforce weak points, they created energy shields where possible, camouflage systems, and improvised weaponry that could disrupt the patrols if they attempted an attack. They also prioritized evacuation plans for the Alarans, ensuring that every shelter, tunnel, and hidden sanctuary could be defended or used to protect civilians. Each crew member knew the risks, but they remained calm, relying on training, intelligence, and their unwavering commitment to the mission. The standoff began quietly at first. Patrol ships hovered on the horizon, sending messages demanding immediate withdrawal. The humans responded not with aggression but with words. They explained their purpose, their intent to protect, and their refusal to abandon a species facing extinction. Their words were broadcast across communication channels, reaching council officers and patrol crews alike. Some dismissed the humans as foolish, but others, hidden observers, minor officials, and members of distant species, began to take note. For the first time, someone within the galaxy's structures questioned the council's priorities. Small skirmishes occurred, mostly accidental. Drones sent by the council were intercepted, harmlessly redirected or disabled using clever tactics devised by the humans and Alarans together. These actions were not about aggression, they were about survival and protection. Each success built confidence, not arrogance. The humans realized that they could not rely on strength alone. They needed strategy, adaptability, and a deep understanding of the planet they were defending. The Alarans' knowledge of their world became invaluable, turning seemingly ordinary terrain into a series of defensive advantages. As days passed, word of the standoff began to spread. Signals leaked beyond the immediate area, reaching other worlds in the galaxy. Observers began to watch, questioning why a small group of humans would risk themselves to defend a species the Council had deemed unimportant. Rumors circulated among merchant fleets, minor civilizations, and independent species. The story of courage, defiance, and protection began to resonate, creating a wave of support that the Council had not anticipated. The humans were no longer isolated. They had become a symbol, a challenge to the indifference that had allowed the Alarans to suffer. The Alarans themselves played an important role. They shared information about hidden passages, energy flows, and natural defenses. They worked with the humans to establish communication systems that could coordinate actions across the planet. Every detail mattered. They were no longer passive victims, they were participants in their own defense. The humans treated them as equals, recognizing their knowledge, experience, and resilience. The trust between the two species grew stronger, with every joint effort, transforming fear into purpose. Despite the growing tension, the humans also understood the importance of morale. They spent time teaching the younger Alarans how to survive in these conditions, how to use simple devices, and how to cooperate in defense without panic. They shared stories, laughter, and small joys to remind everyone that life was worth protecting. For the first time in decades, the Alarans felt capable, empowered, and connected. Their spirits, once broken by neglect and fear, began to rise alongside the humans' determination. One critical moment arrived when a council vessel attempted a direct landing near the main settlement. The humans and Alarans had prepared for this possibility, using energy fields, hidden barriers, and rapid evacuation protocols. The council's ship was forced to retreat, damaged by systems that were simple in technology but brilliant in design and execution. For the humans, it was a victory, but not a moment for celebration. It was a reminder that the Council would return, stronger and more determined. Preparation, vigilance, and adaptability would be the keys to survival. As the standoff continued, the humans realized that their mission had become about more than saving lives. It had become about changing the narrative. They were demonstrating that morality, courage, and empathy could challenge power and indifference. Across the galaxy, other species began to watch, inspired by the humans' actions. The Alaran story was no longer just a tale of abandonment. It was becoming a story of resistance, cooperation, and hope. The humans' willingness to act in the face of danger had shown that even small beings could stand for justice, and that courage could ripple far beyond one planet. Even as the Council, reinforced its fleets, the humans continued to innovate. They developed communication networks, early warning systems, and tactical strategies that allowed the Alarans to stay one step ahead. Every move was carefully coordinated, ensuring that civilians were safe and that vital resources were protected. Humans and Alarans worked side by side, a team bonded not by blood but by shared purpose and trust. They learned from each other, adapted together, and grew stronger as the standoff continued. During this time, the humans also took steps to document everything. They recorded the Council's actions, the state of Ilaria, and the cooperation between species. These records were not meant as weapons but as evidence, as a way to show that indifference could be challenged, that life could be defended, and that courage mattered. This documentation, they hoped, would one day change the opinions of distant worlds and encourage others to act in defense of those who could not defend themselves. As weeks passed, the standoff became a test of endurance, patience, and resolve. The humans faced constant pressure, never knowing when the next Council ship might appear, when the next threat might arise. Yet they did not waver. Their focus remained on the Ilarans, on the protection of life, and on proving that morality could outweigh bureaucracy and power. Each day of survival, each minor victory, and each act of cooperation strengthened the bond between the two species. Together they were no longer victims and strangers. They were defenders, allies, and a symbol of hope. In these tense days, something remarkable happened. The Council's attempts to intimidate began to lose effectiveness. Reports of the humans' courage and the Ilarans' resilience began to spread quietly through the galaxy. Some Council members began to question their own actions. Observers from other worlds started to send messages of support, offering resources, guidance, and solidarity. What had begun as a desperate rescue had grown into a movement that challenged the status quo. The humans had shown that compassion could create change, even in the most unlikely circumstances. By the time the standoff reached its peak, the humans and Ilarans had established a system of defense, communication, and survival that made Ilaria far more resilient than anyone had expected. They had learned to anticipate threats, respond quickly, and protect the vulnerable. They had not relied on power alone. They had relied on strategy, collaboration, and courage. The Ilarans, once abandoned and fearful, now stood ready alongside the humans, prepared to defend their planet, their people, and their hope for the future. The standoff with the Galactic Council was not yet over, but the humans had achieved something far more important. The battle with the Galactic Council had finally subsided, not through sheer force but because the humans and Ilarans had shown the galaxy something it had long forgotten: that life mattered, that courage could challenge power, and that compassion could cross even the greatest distances. The Council retreated, reluctantly acknowledging that further attempts to control Ilaria could provoke greater resistance and unrest in other systems. For the first time in generations, the Ilarans felt a sense of relief, though the scars of the past were still visible across their planet. Their world was wounded but not defeated. The humans did not stay to celebrate. Their mission had never been about recognition or reward. They worked tirelessly with the Ilarans, focusing on rebuilding, restoring, and protecting. Together they repaired shelters, cleared debris from rivers, and planted trees in the most damaged areas. Human knowledge of engineering and technology blended seamlessly with the Ilarans' deep understanding of their planet's ecosystems. Where machines could assist, humans deployed them. Where nature needed guidance, the Ilarans led. Every action was deliberate. Every decision focused on survival and restoration. Children became a symbol of hope. Those who had spent years hiding and surviving in fear were now able to explore open spaces safely. They learned from humans how to use simple tools and technology to help their families, while humans learned from them the secrets of the planet, the way certain plants purified soil, how energy could be harvested safely, and how the smallest actions could make a difference in fragile ecosystems. Laughter, once foreign to the landscape, returned to the valleys and tunnels. The simple sound of joy became a marker of resilience, a reminder that life could thrive again. The adults, too, found strength in cooperation. Alarans shared their culture, traditions, and wisdom, while humans shared techniques for sustainable construction, water management, and medical care. Together, they created plans for long-term survival, combining the best of both worlds. Lessons were exchanged openly, and trust deepened. The Alarans began to see humans not as outsiders, but as allies, friends, and protectors. For the humans, the Alarans were no longer distant beings. They were neighbors, partners, and a living reminder that courage could bridge worlds. As the planet slowly healed, the humans documented everything. They recorded the stories of survival, the strategies used to defend against the Council, and the steps taken to restore life. This documentation was not meant to boast or claim victory. It was meant to serve as a record, a lesson for the galaxy. They wanted the story of Ilaria to inspire others, to remind civilizations that abandoning a species could have consequences, and that even a small group of determined individuals could change the fate of a world. It was a gift of knowledge, a legacy of hope. In the months that followed, small signs of recovery appeared across Ilaria. Rivers, once poisoned and lifeless, began to flow again, fed by careful human and Ilaran intervention. Trees planted in damaged areas took root and grew, creating green patches in the barren landscapes. Animals, once hidden or diminished in numbers, returned to their natural habitats. The humans and Ilarans worked tirelessly to restore balance, understanding that true survival required harmony between technology and nature. Each day brought progress, and each progress brought confidence. The Ilarans, once hesitant and fearful, began to take on leadership roles in the restoration process. They directed efforts, made decisions, and guided humans to the areas most in need. The collaboration was remarkable. Humans provided tools, techniques, and guidance, while the Ilarans provided local knowledge, understanding, and a vision for a sustainable future. Together, they were rebuilding not just the planet, but a society based on trust, cooperation, and mutual respect. The scars of neglect and exploitation remained, but they no longer defined the Ilarans' future. For the humans, the experience had changed them profoundly. They had traveled farther than ever before, faced dangers beyond imagination, and stood up to the most powerful authority in the galaxy. Yet the most important lesson was not about strength or technology. It was about empathy, determination, and the value of life. They had seen a species on the brink of extinction, and they had acted. The courage and kindness displayed on Ilaria became a story they would carry back to Earth, a story of hope that could inspire generations. Slowly, the Ilarans began to imagine a future where they were no longer hiding, where they could thrive openly, and where their planet could heal fully. They began teaching their children skills to survive and grow in harmony with the land, while humans continued to assist with medical care, education, and technology. The Ilarans learned that trust could be rebuilt, that collaboration could create strength, and that even when abandoned by the powerful, life could endure if there were those willing to stand up for it. The relationship between humans and Ilarans became a bridge between worlds. Communication systems were strengthened, allowing contact with distant parts of the galaxy and sharing information about sustainable practices, defense strategies, and cultural exchange. Ilaria was no longer isolated, but part of a larger network of life, supported by those who had once risked everything to protect it. The humans had shown that small actions could resonate across light years, and the Ilarans had shown that resilience, knowledge, and hope could survive even the harshest neglect. Over time, Ilaria became a symbol, a planet that had been nearly lost but was saved through courage, compassion, and collaboration. Observers from other worlds visited, inspired by the story of cooperation and determination. They witnessed humans and Ilarans working side by side, healing a planet, protecting life, and creating a model of what could happen when empathy overcame fear and indifference. The message spread quietly but powerfully. Abandoning life is not inevitable, and those who care can make a difference no matter how small they might seem. The humans eventually prepared to return to Earth, knowing that their mission had been accomplished. They had ensured the safety of the Ilarans, restored the planet's basic systems, and created a foundation for long-term survival. Farewells were emotional. Ellerans had grown attached to the humans, seeing them as family rather than strangers. Children clung to the visitors, adults expressed gratitude that words could scarcely capture. Even in the midst of departure, there was a sense of hope, a belief that the bond between the two species would endure, across distance and time. Before leaving, the humans left behind tools, technology, and training to ensure that the Illarans could continue rebuilding on their own. They shared knowledge about agriculture, medicine, energy, and communication, leaving the Illarans empowered to maintain their planet independently. The humans did not dominate or control. They shared responsibility, trust, and guidance, showing that help was most meaningful when it enabled others to thrive. It was a final act of respect, a way of passing the torch to a species that had endured unimaginable hardship. As the human ship lifted off, the Illarans watched with mixed emotions. Hope, gratitude, and determination filled the air. They had faced abandonment, destruction, and despair, yet now they stood strong, united with humans, ready to rebuild their world. The signal that had once been a desperate plea for help had led to an extraordinary journey, a journey of courage, trust, and the proof that action could change the fate of an entire species. The galaxy had turned away for decades, but humanity had risen to defend life when it mattered most. From that day forward, Ilaria was no longer forgotten. The forests slowly returned, rivers regained their flow, and the skies became alive with the sounds of life. The Illarans continued to thrive, inspired by the humans' courage and the knowledge that help could come from the most unexpected places. And across the stars, the story of their survival traveled quietly, a reminder that compassion, determination, and courage could defy indifference, protect life, and build bridges between worlds that might otherwise remain apart. The humans returned to Earth, forever changed. They carried with them memories of resilience, bravery, and hope. They shared stories of a distant world, teaching others that the smallest actions of courage could ripple across the galaxy. They reminded people that life, no matter where it existed, was valuable, and that standing up for those who could not defend themselves was not only noble but necessary. Ilaria had survived not because of power or politics, but because of empathy, collaboration, and the unwavering belief that life is worth protecting. And so, Ilaria became a beacon of hope, a planet once on the brink of destruction that had been saved by those willing to act when no one else would. Humans and Illarans would remain connected across light years, bound by shared experiences, respect, and the knowledge that even in the darkest corners of the galaxy, courage and compassion could shine brightly. Together, they had proven that life could endure, hope could return, and the galaxy could remember that the forgotten were never truly lost when someone chose to care.